All right, I guess we'll kick things off now. Good morning, everyone, and a special good morning to anyone on the call right now who is a fan of the New South Wales Blues. I would imagine if you'd all be buzzing after last night's comeback win in Game One of State of Origin, and that was really hard for me to say as a Queensland fan. But my name is Kieran. I'm an ICT sales executive here at Vodafone Fiji, and welcome to another installment of our ICT webinar series. So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Vodafone ICT webinar series is a monthly initiative where we bring together Vodafone Fiji and a leading global technology vendor to have an honest, practical, and locally relevant conversation about an ICT topic that matters to organizations here in Fiji and across the Pacific. And today I'm very delighted to be joined by a very special guest, none other than Mr. Tony Moore. He is the Senior Channel Account Manager at Wasabi for the Asia Pacific region. Tony brings a wealth of global expertise and relevant insights to today's conversation, and I know you'll find his contribution incredibly valuable. So, welcome, Tony. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Right. So, we're here to have a conversation, one that we at Vodafone Fiji believe is long overdue for organizations operating across Fiji and the Pacific. The digital landscape here is changing fast. Okay? Cloud adoption is accelerating, cyber threats are growing, and Fiji's regulatory security environment is moving faster than most organizations realize. For those of you who may not be aware, the National Cybersecurity and Resilience Strategy that runs from this year, 2026, through to 2031 is now active. It officially launched back in March, I believe. It was a big event held at GPH, directed by the Ministry of Communications and Police. Right, so Fiji's computer emergency response team is now active, and the question of whether your organization is truly in control of your data has never been more relevant or more urgent than it is today. Right. So what we're going to do is in this session, we'll be covering what data sovereignty really means for Pacific organizations. We'll walk through where organizations commonly lose control of their data, and we'll also look at why that happens. We'll take a look at a few examples, both locally here in Fiji as well as across the Pacific region, and we'll also explore what a locally supported practical solution looks like, for organizations operating in this part of the world. Our goal is quite simple. We want every person on this call to walk away with a clearer picture of where they stand, what they should be thinking about, and what they can do about it. Right? So with that, let's dive into it. So understanding data sovereignty and compliance. So first, we're going to start with a big question, and that is, what does data sovereignty actually mean for an organization here in Fiji and in the Pacific? Now, it gets talked about a lot in government circles, in technology conversations, and increasingly in boardrooms, right? But in our experience, it's also a term that gets misunderstood. Most people hear data sovereignty and their mind immediately goes to geography. Like, what country is my data in? Is it onshore or is it offshore? And while all of these things are very legitimate questions, they're not quite the heart of the matter, because you can know exactly which country your data is sitting in, but you can still have no control over it. So the question we want to ask you today is, it's not about where your data is, but it's really about, am I in control of my data? And that's the shift. And everything that we'll cover in this section flows from that. So when you really think about it, control comes down to three things. The first one is visibility, right? Do you know where your data sits across your cloud environment? Do you have access to it? Is it internal? Is it external? Can you see what's been done at any point in time? Because without visibility, you cannot govern properly. The second one is control itself. Can you define and enforce who gets access to your data and ensure those controls are consistent across your entire environment? Okay, visibility and control go hand in hand. One without the others, it's simply not enough. And then, of course, the third, and this is where we see the most assumptions being made, is about governance over platform. Okay, now time and time again, we speak to organizations who believe that because they're on a well-known cloud platform that they're automatically compliant and protected. And I want to be fair that that assumption comes from a very reasonable place. These are world-class platforms with robust security certifications, so that comfort is completely understandable. But what's important to understand is that cloud computing operates on what is known as the shared responsibility model. So that's a framework that AWS, Azure, Oracle, they've all formally published about, and they all operate on it. And the principle is quite simple, really. So the vendor secures the cloud, the underlying infrastructure, the physical security, as well as the platform itself. And the customer is responsible for the security in the cloud, how their data is configured, who can access it, how it's monitored, and how it's recovered, if something ever goes wrong. So in plain language, and I'm going to go back to using my favorite analogy of F1. The vendor builds and secures the platform. What you put on it, how you govern it, that's your organization's responsibility. So think of it as the vendors being Ferrari. They build the liveries, they build the cars, and your organization is Lewis Hamilton. You're responsible for driving it and taking it in the direction to win the race. So understanding where that line sits is critical, because misunderstanding it is one of the most common reasons that organizations will find themselves exposed. Now, Vodafone Fiji, we are very proud to support AWS, Azure, and Oracle. We stand behind all of them. And this is also where Wasabi fits in. Okay, Wasabi, it's not necessarily here to replace any of those platforms. It's a specialist cloud object storage solution. So it can sit alongside your existing environment, and it can provide the dedicated governance and resilience layer that your organization needs, regardless of which platform sits underneath it. So whether you're with any one of those cloud platforms that I just listed, Wasabi works well with all of them. Okay, we're not asking you to change what you use. We're not asking whether you have the right governance framework around your data. No, sorry, we are asking whether you have the right governance framework around your data. Okay, the platform is only part of the answer. Governance, visibility, and control are the rest. And that's what today's conversation is really about. So we've established what data sovereignty really means in practice, but now I want to talk about why this conversation is particularly urgent for organizations operating here in the Pacific, because our context is genuinely different compared to anywhere else in the world. And I think it's important that we be honest about that. So the first reality that comes to mind is our physical infrastructure. So as island nations, we have cyclones, flooding, undersea cable disruptions. These aren't rare events. They're part of how we operate. Our geography means we rely on a small number of critical systems, whether it's power, connectivity, and sometimes in many cases, we have a single international cable that's linking us to the rest of the world. And we saw how vulnerable that can be back in 2022. I'm sure all of you may have been aware of the volcanic eruption that happened in Tonga. I think it was in Feb of that year. So as the result of that eruption, it severed the country's only international cable. So overnight, the country's normal internet connectivity went down. Connectivity was very, very limited. This was due to satellite access that was available for a few weeks while repairs to that cable were underway. Now, when connectivity is disrupted at that level, it's not just about people being offline. No, it's organizations losing access to systems, services, and data that they depend on every day. So in an environment like ours, the question isn't just, where is your data stored? It's whether you can still access it, still recover it, and keep operating when the infrastructure around you goes down. Now, the second is our regulatory environment. Now, this one has shifted significantly in recent times. As I had mentioned before, our cybersecurity strategy was officially launched. Our CERT team is now active, and the government has invested over $5 million into our country's digital infrastructure. So it's no longer a conversation about preparing for what's coming because it's already here. So in a sense, we're now playing catch up to everything that's already been put in place. And organizations without the proper governance and without the proper frameworks, they're already lagging behind. Now, the third is cost. Now, Pacific organizations operate on constrained IT budgets. It's unpredictable cloud costs. These don't just create financial pressure, but they also create governance pressure. When budgets are tight, organizations make compromises. Shorter retention periods, maybe less monitoring, fewer controls. Those compromises create gaps. And in this environment, those gaps cost proportionally more to recover from what they would in a larger market. And then, of course, the fourth, and this one I think is particularly honest and important to acknowledge, is that here in the Pacific, here in Fiji, is the IT, we're very limited in terms of local ICT capacity, and we're also a great distance from help, from support. So most global technology vendors don't really have that much of a presence, on the ground here in the Pacific or here in Fiji. So when something goes wrong, and we'll see a few examples in a moment, and trust me, things do go wrong sometimes. Organizations often find themselves trying to resolve a crisis with limited local expertise and support that is thousands of kilometers away. So this isn't a criticism. It's a reality of operating in a small island nation, but it is a reality that makes the governance conversation and having locally supported solutions in a place before something goes wrong critically important. And this is where I want to be direct about what Vodafone Fiji plays, or what our role is in this conversation, because we're not a global vendor operating from thousands of kilometers away. We're here, we're on the ground here in Fiji. When something goes wrong, you're not logging a ticket to a help desk that's on the other side of the world. You're calling a team that understands your environment, that understands the Pacific context, but also is locally accountable. These are realities that make this conversation uniquely urgent for us. And they are realities that have shaped everything that you're going to hear in today's session. So let's now look at where organizations commonly lose control. And I think, given what we've just discussed, some of these points will feel very close to home. So where organizations commonly lose control. Now, we've established what data sovereignty really means and what genuine control looks like in practice. Now, I want to get to the part of the conversation that I think will resonate most with people on the call today, because we're going to talk about where organizations actually lose that control. Now, before I get into these points, I want to say something quite very clearly. What you're about to hear are not platform problems. They're not criticisms of any technology your organization is currently using. These are governance and management challenges that occur in any cloud environment, regardless of the platform that sits underneath it. They are organizational gaps, and the good news is that a lot of these gaps is addressable. So the first one that you'll see on your screen now is data location and visibility. Right. Most organizations we speak to don't have a complete and centralized picture of where the data sits. It spreads across multiple services, multiple accounts, multiple platforms, often without anyone having a clear view or having a full picture of where everything is. And this happens quietly, right? Cloud environments grow fast. So when government governance isn't keeping pace, it's pretty simple. You can't govern what you can't see. And for many organizations, this is far more often than they realize. Now, the second is access, retention, and audit. Now, every major cloud platform provides access control tools. That's not the issue. The issue is that those tools need to be properly configured and actively managed on an ongoing basis. So what we commonly see is that there is access rights that were set up in the beginning and then were never reviewed. This leaves doors open that should have been closed a long time ago. The audit trails exist, but they've only been useful if someone is actively monitoring them. And without clear retention policies, data gets kept far longer than necessary or even deleted before it should be, both of which create real risk. Now, the third one is cost uncertainty. And I want to frame this carefully because this isn't a conversation about which platform is expensive. This is about what happens when cloud environments grow without proper governance around them. Okay, unmonitored usage, unoptimized storage, ungoverned data growth. These things quietly accumulate until they become a problem. Now, cost uncertainty it's a governance issue. And organizations that have strong governance frameworks are consistently the ones that have their costs under control. And the fourth one, and this is one particularly close to home for all of us here in the Pacific, it's the impact of cyber incidents and natural disasters. Okay. Very recently, we've seen ransomware attacks increasing across the region. We've seen what happened to Tonga's government. This was an example that I had given you, I think, 2 webinars ago. A Pacific nation not unlike our own, but the damage that was caused to them was very real and it's lasting. Okay, cyclones, flooding, cable outages, as again we saw in Tonga, these are not hypothetical risks for us. They happen, and organizations without tested backup and recovery plans face the very real possibility of a permanent data loss when they do. So those are 4 areas where organizations most commonly lose control, not because of the platform that they use, but because of the governance frameworks they have or don't have around them. And here's the thing, every one of these challenges is addressable, which is exactly why the next part of today's session is what the next part of today's session is going to show when I hand you over to Tony. Now, the last thing I want to get into is a few regional incidents here in Fiji and in the Pacific. So bringing this a little closer to home, these aren't hypothetical scenarios or case studies that we had pulled from somewhere overseas. These are real things that have actually happened in our region to organizations and to communities, much similar to our own. So, for example, here in Fiji, the Suva City Council had experienced a major disruption where access to their internal data system was lost. Okay, systems were taken offline. The council had to fall back to manual processes, just to keep essential services running. Everything from payments, permits, and just regular day-to-day operations. Now, these were all affected due to that attack. Now, it's a clear example that when organizations lose access to their data, even if it's temporary, the impact is immediate and it affects these entities at an operational level. Then also in Tonga, we saw a similar thing, but this was at a much larger scale. So Tonga's National Health Information System had fallen victim to a cyber attack. Now, this health system supports patient records across the country, and due to that attack, those records were unavailable, and the government had to shut it down. Hospitals reverted to pen and paper. Patients were asked to bring in physical records to receive care. So when access to critical data systems is lost, the impact isn't just operational, it directly affects essential services. And then, of course, there's Cyclone Winston, as many of us remember. This was 10 years ago. It is Category 5 cyclone, the biggest tropical cyclone ever recorded in the Southern Hemisphere at the time. It completely ripped through the entire Eastern Division. Now, Winston wasn't a cyber attack compared to the other two, but when you look at the outcome, it very much mirrors a cyber attack. Power went down, communication severed. Emergency responders, if you remember, were trying to coordinate disaster response without being able to access the systems when they needed it. Health workers couldn't pull up patient records. Relief teams were trying to figure out where to send resources across the islands that they couldn't reach or couldn't see. And roughly 62% of the country's population was affected. And for days, whole communities were essentially invisible. They're not just physically cut off, but digitally cut off as well. So these are three separate events, three completely different causes: a ransomware attack on a council, a data breach for a national health system, and a cyclone. And yet, when you line them up, they tell the same story, is that organizations lost access to their systems, they lost visibility over their data, and they lost control right at the moment where having control mattered the most. And that's what I want to leave you with, because it reframes the whole conversation. Okay, data sovereignty tends to get discussed as a legal question or a technical one about jurisdictions and contracts where your servers physically sit. And yes, all of those things matter. But these three examples, what they show us is that sovereignty has a much more immediate meaning. Okay, it's not just about where your data lives. It's about whether you can still get to it when the power goes up, when the network goes down, when someone decides to hold it hostage, or in the case of maybe a natural disaster. It's about whether a storm or a criminal or a simple system failure can take away your ability to run your services, protect your people, and of course, make decisions when the stakes are at its highest. Because control isn't something you can scramble for in the middle of a crisis. It has to be built in long before the cyclone forms, long before a cyber attack happens or a breach happens, and long before someone ever sends a ransom note. So that's what I want to leave you with. But I will now hand you over to Mr. Tony Moore, who will talk to us a bit more in depth about Wasabi and their role. Pinaka.
Thank you, Kieran. Bulla, everybody. Good morning from a very, very soggy Sydney. It's a pleasure to be here. Kieran has asked Wasabi to do a bit of a presentation on who and what Wasabi is and where we obviously fit into the cloud ecosystem. So who is Wasabi and what do we want to do? So let's go with what we want to do first. So quite simply, we want to store the world's data. We essentially, the DNA of the organization was around backup data, and obviously from a data durability standpoint, also from an archiving standpoint. But then during the course of the 10 years that the company's been up and running, we've now moved into other areas around data management. So around kind of having cloud tiering and workflow management. But more recently, it has now become very, very evident around AI organizations, and they are consuming hundreds and hundreds of petabytes of data, and they're storing it in Wasabi based on our financial model, and I'll talk about that shortly, which is very, very conducive for them in the amount of data that they are scraping from the internet, putting into AI models, and obviously then deriving other models out of that to then sell to their clients. And the amount of data that they're generating essentially will be moving into exabytes in the not too distant future. So who is Wasabi? So the company, as I said, has been around for just over 10 years. Head office is in Boston, Massachusetts. Our two founders actually have a background in backup applications. They started Carbonite back in the early 2000s. Some of you may have heard of it. It's still around today. It's a retail backup application. They sold that a few years later. And then about 11, 12 years ago, they saw an area in the marketplace where literally the big three had been taking the market for a bit of a ride, where they said to everybody, give us all your data, we'll take care of it for you, it'll be right on the night. But in the event that you need to get your data back, we'll have the audacity to charge you even more money for you to get your data out of the cloud. So what we did was we built a platform that's identical in technology to Amazon S3, Azure Blob, Google Cloud Platform, but straight out of the gate, we are 80% cheaper than all of the hyperscalers. So for the first time, there was a cloud platform that was financially appropriate, and I use those words, for companies to store large amounts of backup, archive, unstructured data for an extended period of time. But in the event that you need to get that data back out, we don't charge a cent for egress fees. We don't charge for API calls. When you look at the list here, these are all the associated fees that the hyperscalers will charge you for storing data in their cloud environments. Wasabi does not charge anything apart from the actual capacity. So it's essentially a case of you've got a one-line bill for how much storage a company is using or how much they've got reserved. So from our partners' perspective, and more importantly, from your perspective as clients, we can offer a predictability and a stability in the pricing model based on a certain amount of storage. So say for argument's sake, you were to put 100 terabytes of your data into Wasabi tomorrow. And then 12 months from now, you've still got that 100 terabytes in there. Now, you can go to your CFOs, managing directors, presidents, chairmen, whoever the case may be, and literally say to them to the dollar how much that 100 terabytes is going to cost. Now, I'll give you two scenarios. Scenario one, you're going to have a lovely year. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping, there's been no ransomware attacks, nobody's deleted anything, it's all been beautiful. Scenario two, the office is burnt to the ground, the data center's been flooded, you've been crypto locked, people have been deleting stuff left, right, and center when they shouldn't have. The only thing that connects those two scenarios is that it costs exactly the same amount of money. So you can, for the first time, have an ability to be able to do long-term forecasting over 3, 4, 5 years into the future. And it doesn't matter what happens to you during that period of time. You could get hit from pillar to post. You have to restart every system under the sun. And there's no detrimental financial impact where you suddenly end up with a telephone number for a monthly bill based on all the associated fees. So the company has been based around the 3 Ps. So obviously price to begin with, we've just talked about that, and obviously the model that we have there with no egress and the predictability and the stability. Performance, I will talk about that in a second because it does come up obviously from time to time in regards to the way that we actually price the model. And then obviously protection. So first of all our environments have ISO 27001, they have SOC 2 compliance, plus also internationally we are FedRAMP ready in the United States for the federal government, GDPR compliance also for our European clients and European data centers. The environments have 11 nines of durability. And then we then talk about some of the security protocols with the Wasabi storage. So first of all, we offer immutability. And that's one of the big selling points for our cloud storage, because in today's day and age, where you obviously have an increasing level of ransomware attacks, malware attacks, immutability can obviously stop that from occurring. And we actually offer that free of charge. It's called what we call object lock. The hyperscalers will actually charge for that. It'll be one of their, because it's based on API calls. Because we don't charge for API calls, it's provided as a complimentary service. And in this day and age, where you may have heard of these high-profile class action lawsuits against Optus, so the second largest telecommunications company in Australia, also Medibank, which is one of the largest private health providers here in the country, having data breaches. Cyber liability insurance has now become a far more prevalent aspect and everything like that in today's environment. And the first thing the insurance company will actually ask you is, where do you keep your copy of immutable data? Other aspects too, also with protection, we offer MFA. Now, everybody has that. It's been around forever. It's obviously something that we highly encourage. But we actually do have another security protocol that Wasabi introduced back at the beginning of last year. So every now and then we get a client or a partner kind of contacting us saying, listen, we've accidentally deleted some data. Can you get it back for us? And it's like, well, no, for obvious reasons. We don't have access to client data. So obviously for that security point. So we instigated a security protocol called multi-user authentication, or MUA. It's like having the nuclear launch keys. No one particular person can launch the missile. Same thing with deletion of data. No one person can delete data without the approval of up to 3 pre-approved personnel from the company to give the okay for the data to be deleted. So it takes out accidental deletion off the table from ever occurring, but more importantly, it takes out malicious deletion. So if you happen to have a bad actor in your organization, or somebody who knows that they're about to be kind of relieved from their job at the company, and they're going to do something malicious and obviously damage data or delete data, it takes that scenario out of play. So in the 10 years that we've been up and running, we've now moved into 16 data centers around the world, including Australia. So we are in the SY5, Equinix SY5 data center down near Sydney Airport, and obviously in North America. And one of the aspects that I do know about as far as Fiji's consideration around data sovereignty is that they count Australia and the United States as an appropriate location to store data. Now, one thing around data sovereignty and the movement of data, Wasabi will guarantee that if you put data into one of these locations, and you've got the ability to be able to put them in any data center around the world, and the pricing remains consistent, there's no change in the pricing model, it's a global standard, the data will stay in that location unless you request it to be moved. In the last 10 years, as I said, we've just received latest figures. We've now passed 120,000 clients. But that number is kind of arbitrary because we consider a partner like Vodafone Fiji as one client. We've got over 17,000 partners now around the world. And when they're taking care of 10 or 20 clients of their own, to be honest, we don't know what the real number is. It's obviously in the millions. And we've now just recently passed 4 exabytes of storage on the ground. So we're now bigger than IBM Cloud. And we are now the largest storage provider in the world behind the big 3. And we've been able to do that in under 10 years. And I want to go back to the part around performance. So as I said previously, we are 80% cheaper than the hyperscalers. So we get a question every now and then, which is a reasonable question. If we're a fifth of the price, is the quality of the environment a fifth of it as well? So a few years ago, we did a bunch of comparison tests against Amazon S3. Now, Amazon has about 10 different levels of S3. So we did these tests on the very, very top layer of S3. And you'll be able to find these results on the Wasabi website. But in 37 out of 40 comparison tests, we came in 2 times faster for read and 3 times faster for write. So not only are we a fraction of the cost compared to the big boys, but we actually have superior performance and everything there in the environment. And so what Vodafone Fiji is looking at doing is they're leveraging our compute resources and putting together their management expertise for their clients. And it will be a case of that 99 times out of 100, people won't buy Wasabi just because we're Wasabi. We'll literally be one piece of a bigger puzzle. And it could be around backup as a service. It could be around archive as a service, immutability as a service. It could be a scenario where the client is looking to deprecate LTO tape hardware and they don't want to maintain tape libraries anymore. They don't want to refresh the hardware. But it's a case of that a solution, it could be as simplistic in its nature, or it could be as complicated and elegant in its nature, depending on the client requirements, all require a cloud target. And so they look at us again, from that financial model where there's no ongoing costs, apart from obviously services revenue, which is obviously part and parcel with the industry, but it's those fees that you do not take into account, that you don't know is about to happen unless some kind of disaster strikes. And obviously, as Kieran was alluding to, natural disasters are something that is fairly frequent, obviously, in the region. Another part too, we've done around security. So we've obviously got immutability, and we've got the MUA. And then we released this earlier on this year, Covert Copy. This is our air-gapped version of storage. Now, immutability is great, obviously from stopping ransomware attacks and obviously attacks on data being corrupted or being molested, but it doesn't stop somebody from also reading the data. And so if a client essentially has a level of criticality on their data, Covert Copy is an immutable, invisible copy of data. And the only way to illuminate that data is, again, with an MUA. So you may have a certain set of data sets, certain buckets. You don't have to replicate your entire data load into Covert Copy, but it could be a case of that you just need to have that extra level of criticality in the way that that data is being managed. So we released that this year. It's not charged at a premium. It is actually charged at exactly the same rate per terabyte. $6.99 US a terabyte is the RRP pricing. And then you have that ability to obviously extend that extra storage and everything like that into Covert Copy. Now, something that has become prevalent over the last 6 months or so has been the astronomical increase in hardware costs, whether it be from CPUs, RAM, or storage. And storage has increased around 400% over the last 6 or 7 months or so. And that has been essentially driven by the likes of Meta, Google, Facebook, that are literally buying every piece of hardware that they can lay their hands on in the construction of these monumental AI farms. And the subsequent result has been, as far as like timeframes and all that in getting hardware, where it's now been pushed out to 6 or 7 months. As I said, storage costs have increased around 400%, and it's not going to go away anywhere soon. So we put together this little chart here, where it actually does comparisons of hardware costings versus Wasabi cloud costings. And cloud now is becoming, probably for the second time, at the beginning of the pandemic, cloud for the very first time had its ability to be able to demonstrate its value add, because shipping lanes were getting closed down, countries were getting closed off, and people were literally panicking about their ability to be able to get hardware. And so when you went through a normal procurement process where you would go to an IT partner, you'd say, look, I want to get a price for a couple of different servers. So they would then put together a configuration. They would then provide a quote. You would then generate a PO. They would then order the equipment. It might take then a couple of months to get the equipment shipped. Best case, probably 3 to 4 weeks. But then you would have to rack it, stack it, and power it up, and then obviously build the systems. And you're looking at a normal procurement program that would probably take 2 to 3 months, where suddenly you could now do exactly the same thing in a cloud environment and have that environment running up in the same day. Same thing is happening again now with what's happening, obviously from different circumstances, but for the second time, cloud has actually been able to demonstrate its value simply because of the difficulty and the ever increasing costs of having with hardware. That is about it. It's a fair bit to take into, but please, I would reach out to Vodafone. They're one of our strategic partners in the Asia Pacific region. They are putting together solutions and all that on a bespoke basis. So it's not a case of trying to put the square peg into the round hole. It's a bespoke type solution. And hopefully we'll be able to obviously come up with some designs and everything that alleviate some concerns you have around data durability, data sovereignty, or the way that you just simply are managing that data there. But on that note, I will hand it back over to Kieran, and I thank you very much for your time this morning. You're on mute, Kieran.
Apologies. Okay. Thank you, Tony. Right. So we've heard from Tony what Wasabi brings to the table, from a technology perspective. And it is a really compelling solution, purpose built for exactly the challenges that we've been discussing today. But technology alone is never the complete answer, and this is where Vodafone Fiji comes in. Because the question we often hear the most when organizations are considering a new cloud solution isn't about the technology itself, it's about who's going to help us set this up, who do we call when something goes wrong, no, who is going to make sure that we stay on top of it over time. These are the right questions, and they are exactly why what we're here to answer. So we are on the ground here in Fiji. We understand the local environment, the local constraints, and the local realities that no global vendor can fully appreciate from the outside. When something goes wrong, and in any technology environment, something always does go wrong. You're not logging a ticket, as I said, with a help desk all the way on the other side of the world. You're calling a team that's right here. That is a distinction that matters enormously, especially in this part of the world. From a solution standpoint, we're working with Wasabi to offer you flexible solutions that suit every type of organization. So whether you're an SME and you're taking your first serious step towards cloud governance, or a large enterprise with significant and complex data storage needs, the reserve capacity storage is an offering that is designed to scale with you, right? And for those who want to experience the solution before you start making a commitment, we can offer you a free 1 month trial. So you can test it within your own environment, see how it works for your organization, and then make an informed decision from there. So no pressure and no obligation. From a practical standpoint, Vodafone Fiji, we will help you manage the onboarding, the configuration, and the ongoing operations on your behalf. So we can integrate the solution seamlessly, into your existing environment. Now, whether it's AWS, Azure, Oracle, or any other private cloud that you may have, we can make sure we'll ensure that there is no disruption and no heavy lifting on your end. So the transition is both smooth and ongoing management that's also handled locally. But beyond the initial setup, we also provide ongoing governance and compliance support. And I want to be very specific about what that means, because compliance in Fiji, as I said, is no longer a conversation about what's coming, because it's already here. With our cybersecurity strategy, CERT now being active, organizations are now expected to have the right governance frameworks in place. And we here at Vodafone, we can help you build and maintain those frameworks. So that ensures your storage environment is aligned to the strategy's objectives, and it remains aligned as the implementation develops over time. And then we can also provide continuous monitoring and regular optimization for your environments. So we ensure that the storage is performed efficiently, your costs remain predictable, and your governance posture stays strong. So to bring today's conversation full circle, the question we started with was whether your organization is truly in control of its own data. Wasabi provides the technology that makes the control possible, and we here at Vodafone Fiji, we provide the local presence. We provide the accountability and the managed service capability that makes it real for your organizations. So together, that is a complete answer to the challenges that we've been discussing today, and it's one that's available to you right now. And please don't forget, if you have any further questions, if you'd like to request follow-up meetings one-on-one with with our ICT team, with Tony, please do reach out to us at corporate.ict@vodafone.com.fj. I'll leave that in the chat for you. There. So please, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at that email. If you want to book any meetings with our ICT team, we can also bring in Tony as well. If you want to have a further discussion about Wasabi, please reach out to us again at corporate.ict@vodafone.com.fj. Now, I'm sure a lot of you may have questions. from today's discussion. So, this is the chance where you get to rattle off any questions that you have. There's a Q&A tab at the top of your screens, if you can see it. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them there, and Tony and I will do our best to answer them as best we can.
I think you've done a splendid job, Kieran, explaining everything. I think everybody seems to be fully up to date.
Looks like it, yes. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them. If there are no questions, then we can just end the session here. I'll just give you guys a few more minutes. If you have a thought of a question, now's the time you can think of one. All right. I don't think there's any questions. So in that case, I think we will go ahead and end the session for today. Once again, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. Your participation really, really inspires us to do better with these webinars, and it's what makes these encounters all the more worthwhile. And a big Vinakavaka level to Tony for joining us here today. Tony, thank you for joining in.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing your expertise, and we look forward to collaborating with you on any future webinars. And I'm very sure that we'll be having another one very soon. So to everyone here, once again, thank you so much. Keep your eyes out on the Vodafone Fiji LinkedIn and Facebook pages. We'll be giving you more details of any future webinars that we might have. And thank you for joining in today, Vinakavaka Level, and we'll see you in the next one.